So I have one thing that I wanted to confess to you, and that I didn't think I'd still be lost after 20 years of self-improvement. And it feels a bit ridiculous to admit that, because as someone at midlife who just turned 40 years old, I feel like I should have more to show for it. After all this work on myself over the years, I was still haunted by this feeling that I was still that small, weird, self-conscious kid that started this self-improvement journey back in 2006 in college. Even after doing things that only years before I could only dream about. I couldn't shake that feeling. And it really confounded me and frustrated me, because during those years, those 20 years of, what you would call self-improvement, I pursued many things. Magic, improv, social dynamics, and hundreds of self-improvement podcasts and books. And it was great. I feel like I kind of uncovered a lot of nooks and crannies in myself and exposed myself to many things. But with kind of some distance from it now, it just kind of feels like I was adorning myself in different clothes. Trying on this outfit one day and then this outfit, a year later. And a lot of the things were surface level, chasing girls, trying on different personalities, this sort of performing, and a lot of knowledge consumption and, being able to regurgitate ideas that resonated with me, sure, but maybe was aimed to kind of seem impressive or knowledgeable or interesting. So I've been looking through my journal. I've kept the journal kind of loosely from 2018 to 2024. And recently I was kind of, I've looked at some entries, recently, and I've noticed they reveal a repetitive struggle. And I look back to 2020 when I say I struggled to sever my attachment to my old identity of feeling myself as this small, weird, socially incompetent person. And in 2023, I write, I harbor this belief that I'm weird and socially anxious, and people will see this and not accept and want to be around me. That is something that hasn't defined me for a long time. So why do I still hold on to this belief? It's so toxic and constrains me from living the life I want in so many ways. When will I let this go and reclaim my power? So you see, those entries were 3.5 years apart, but it was the same belief operating behind the scenes. And if I'm be perfectly honest, sitting here in July 2026, that same belief is still there. So what I've realized is that I'm never gonna get rid of that part of me that feels like that small, weird, socially self-conscious person. It's just a part of me, and the practice is to learn to live in harmony with it and to welcome it when it comes. So this is what's behind IFS, Internal Family Systems. It was developed by Richard Schwartz, and basically it's like the psychological system that recognizes that you, in totality, is made up of many different parts. And so in IFS, you start to learn to look, assess, and kind of become aware of your different parts. And so I bring this up because I don't think I'm gonna ever get rid of that part, that weird, socially anxious, small kid. And, you know, in 2020, I asked myself something harder, and I asked myself, is my preoccupation with self-improvement the root of my spiritual discontent? And, you know, along with that entry was a quote by Alan Watts, the great spiritual entertainer. I wrote something that he wrote in his autobiography about self-improvement being a dangerous form of vanity. So by age 35, your character's mainly formed by that point. So he saw, he saw your character as something to be used rather than something to change. And so he advocated complete self-acceptance, right? And so I was kind of like knocking around that idea. I've always been drawn to Eastern religion and philosophy. And that, I think, goes well with what I said about IFS, right? And not ever, like, your parts aren't going to go away, whatever your parts are. It really comes down to welcoming and accepting those parts. Now, I want to say one thing. I don't want to come across as like this person who's got things figured out. You know, I've been in the self-improvement trenches, or whatever you want to call it, for like 20 years, definitely. But I'm very much still trying to figure things out. But after 20 years, I'm realizing that I've allowed myself to hide behind over-intellectualizing life, wallowing in chronic dissatisfaction, you know, kind of like thinking and planning life rather than being life. And then sort of like this like constant chasing of horizons. And I realize that, like, I've been stuck in this while my life passes in front of my eyes to a large extent. It feels like being at a waiting station for a life that never comes. And I'm seeing that it's not about knowledge anymore. Sitting here at age 40, I know enough. I've read enough books. And true transformation isn't achieved that way anyway. Because you could get stuck in this mode of being like this knowledge collector. Without ever really changing anything. And allowing myself to arrive and actually embody something. And it makes me think of what Hermann Hesse wrote in the book Siddhartha, how seeking creates like these blinders, and that you miss things that are right under your nose because you're so obsessed with that goal that you have. And that finding requires you to be free, and receptive, and without this obsession of a goal. And he also said that knowledge could be communicated, but wisdom can't. And wisdom you could only seek out and find and be fortified by. And if you haven't read Siddhartha, I can't recommend it enough. It's a very short book. It's about 100 pages. You can knock it off in a weekend, but especially if you like Eastern philosophy and religion, it's an incredible book. And Hermann Hesse is one of my favorite authors just in general, because he has this strong spiritual self-discovery pulse that runs through his books, and a lot of it's kind of like around this idea that, like, go your own way, like follow the unconventional path. And so this is why I've realized that I'm not as emotionally fluid as I would expect over 20 years of self-improvement. And it's because, like, I've lived from the neck up in knowledge and theoretical ideas. And at the end of the day, you know, it's safe to over-intellectualize everything. And so where I found myself is that much hasn't dropped into the body. It hasn't registered in my nervous system. Some of it has, definitely. And I'll get to that. But a lot of that knowledge has just remained abstract. And it makes sense, though, because to register things into your body and your nervous system, it's a lot harder than reading a book. And I'm also not saying that you can't gain profound insights through books. Like, you definitely, obviously can. Like, books could change your life. But I've realized that it's really not how much you know, but what you could embody, like what you could ground in your life. That's the main thing that I've come to. And with that said, a couple paths of mine have always, you know, during this 20 years of self-improvement, have always felt more honest and authentic in a way. And those two paths were Muay Thai, the martial art, and plant medicine, notably ayahuasca. And that's because both of those work deeply on your body. You know, when I was, you know, back in 2018, when I trained for 2 fights and I had to go through the required fight camps, like, that demanded things of me physically and psychologically that, you know, reading a book or watching a video, you know, could never like match. And the same thing goes with plant medicine. Like, sitting in ceremony with a powerful medicine is gonna start to kick up things in your psyche and body that, again, that is far deeper than any theoretic or abstract concepts. And when I started to embody these practices, both started in 2016, funny enough. Something moved that reading a book never touched. This is why I started this channel, to allow myself the opportunity to express and to create, to sit in what's messy and uncomfortable, and to take action in, like, an embodied way, and focus on building community around ideas around healing, meaning, purpose, personal transformation, things like that. So I used to think that there was some version of me on the other side of all this work. You know, this guy that arrived, he was fixed and done, and can now, like, you know, live his life. It gets back to that whole waiting station image that I talked about earlier. But I don't think that guy exists. What I've got instead now is just showing up, being, you know, staying honest, connecting to what's real and present, and doing the next embodied thing. And that's it. That's the whole practice toward greater wholeness. If you made it this far, thank you. And if you have any thoughts about your own self-improvement journey or anything that this sort of kicked up for you, I'd love to hear it. Please share it, drop it in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.